What's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I am Shruti Kapoor, a front-end engineer with over a decade worth of experience with React, and on this channel I bring you React tutorials to help you understand React and AI without the hype. Before we jump in, this video is sponsored by Scrimba. If you want to learn React, honestly Scrimba is the best way to do it by not just watching a video but also trying it out. I'll get into it in a bit, but for now, here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at React 19.2's major updates. We are going to look at Activity, we're going to look at ViewTransition, performance tracks, useEffectEvent. So if you're excited, let's get into it. Before we get started, give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I'm going to make async React deep dive if I get 500 likes on this video. You think we can do it? I'm sure we can do it. And now let's get into React 19.2. Let's talk my favorite component, which is the activity component. You know how typically when we have a conditional, React will actually mount and unmount that component when it sees this conditional, when the condition is true or false. However, with the new activity component, React can actually save its state for later. And it can be super cool for implementing features like typing in a form and then making sure that that data is still present in the form if, let's say, a user navigates away from the form, or when you have a sidebar open and you want to save the state of where the user was in the scroll bar, or when you have a search bar and you type something in the search field and you want to save that state. To show you an example, let's take a look at what happens when you hover on a movie in Netflix. So when you hover on something, you'll notice that it actually starts playing the trailer, right? But then when you move away and you come back to it, it starts from the starting again. I do not like this. I want it to actually continue from where I was watching so that I don't have to watch the whole trailer again. So let's implement that with activity. Now, this video is a hands-on video. I want you to try out this code yourself by checking out this link. This is the same code that we developed in the React crash course, which if you haven't done yet, I'm going to share a link to that in the description as well. But right now, pause the video, download this code so that we can be at the same page and try out activity ourselves. So here's what we do. We have this Netflix trending now component at the bottom, and just like Netflix, if we hover on this, we have this movie player component. To keep this demo simple, I'm actually not auto-playing the movie, but you get the idea. If I click on play, it'll start playing my movie, and then if I hover away, it stops the movie. And then if I move to another item, it starts playing that movie. And then if I go back, I've lost the progress of that movie or the trailer. Let's fix this with activity component and I'll show you how easy it is. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we are on React 19.2. Then I'm going to import activity in this card component. And remember we talked about that before when we used to do conditional rendering. Now we can actually replace that with activity. So let's do that. The way to do that is actually calling activity component and give it a mode. If it's hovered, then set the mode to be visible. If it's not hovered, then set the mode to be hidden. And in this case, I have to give it the component that I want to show if it is hovered, which is going to be the movie player component. Now that's all I got to do for this. But at the same time, I'm going to remove this conditional rendering of image here, which is actually the placeholder that you see when you're not hovered. And I'm going to add this inside in activity as well. And then same thing, if it is not hovered, then it is visible. Otherwise, it's hidden. Just that, I'm going to save this and let's see what we get. So hover on this, play this movie. 2 seconds, move away to the next video and come back. And it's still there. How easy was that? That was literally one line of code we added, just added the activity component, removed the conditional rendering, and there we have it. We have the state preserved. So easy. I love this component. And you can use the same kind of stuff for search component where you have something typed in the field and then you want to save that as a state. Now, something cool about activity is that it actually can be clubbed with a suspense powered component. For example, you have multiple tabs and you need to load something in a tab. So you can wrap the suspense behind an activity component and activity will do the job of actually pre-rendering the data behind the scenes for you so that when you switch to this component post, it's actually ready. However, remember that this only works for stuff that is suspense powered. So if you have data fetching in an effect, that's not going to work. Activity does not detect data fetch in an effect. However, it's going to work with views. It's going to also work with libraries like Next.js and TanStack. If you want to see a full demo of using async React with TanStack start so that all of these new features are ready to go, give this video a big like and comment down TanStack so I can make that video for you next. Okay, at this point, you'll notice that if we move between different movies, the movie does actually store our state without having to do anything else, which is awesome. However, watch this. When I play this movie and I move on to the next one, not always will it actually pause the movie. And that's a problem. This is something important to remember about activity. Because your components are in this state where React actually remembers the state, you also need to make sure that if you have any effects that need to be cleaned up, you're doing that. In this case, although I do not have a use effect in here, however, because I'm using video player, it continues to run behind the scenes because it's an actual video element. So in order to fix this bug, what I need to do is add a cleanup function. I'm going to use layout effect here instead of use effect because this is related to DOM element being painted, and add a ref element here. And in the cleanup function, I'm just going to pause the video. So now if I play this and move on, it actually pauses the video. So remember this about activity, that if you have an effect that is triggered in one of the activity components, you also need to remember to clean up that effect. Now, I talk about effects in detail and the common mistakes that happen with use effect in a video, which is going to be linked here and in the description, so go check that out. So what's cool about activity is that it takes care of a lot of the user experience that we were initially writing with useState and having to store that state in our local state or in Redux or in a state management library. Activity component can actually take care of those for you right away. I think a right question to ask to see if activity is the right fit for you is if you need to restore state of a UI to a certain item, then activity might be the right fit. For example, you're scrolling through the list and you want to make sure that you're keeping the scroll element active or hovered or outline visible, then activity might be the right fit for you. So that was activity. But one of the most important features that was talked about both in in-person discussions and the talks at the conference was view transition. Now, even though this is an experimental feature, a video on React 19.2 is incomplete without talking about view transitions. So let's talk about it. Just like how activity component helps you store state and restore that state, view transitions helps you add animations between components, especially between navigations, between one element transitioning to another element. And I'm going to show you how to use view transitions in another example. So let's go back to our Netflix app. Now let's look at the movie detail page. On this page, I have some description of this movie and I can click on this button, watch movie, to play my movie. And if I hit play, it starts the chopping vegetables scene again. But what I want you to focus on here is, I'm going to give it a reload. When I click on the watch movie button, I want you to focus on how this movie element appears. So I click on the button and it just sort of appears. There's no transition. It's kind of rough. So let's make it nicer. Now, in order to make this transition better, we have ViewTransition available in the experimental version of React. And in order to use this, all you gotta do is wrap your element in ViewTransition and then start the transition based on whatever button should launch that transition. So in our case, when I click on this watch movie button, I'm gonna start the transition and then I'm gonna wrap my element in the ViewTransition component. So it's super easy to do. You just got to make sure that you are on the experimental version of React and then you can use view transition. So let's go ahead and add this. First thing, wrap your element within view transition. Second thing, trigger that transition. So in the handle watch movie click handler, I'm just going to start transition. And now if I give this a reload, click on watch movie, it has that nice fade in effect. So much nicer. Now, what is cool is that this is a CSS animation added for you for free. So we're going to inspect that, go into animations in your Chrome dev tool, and we're going to actually see what happens when we click on this. So the way this works is you click on watch movie, and then at the bottom here, you will see which animations are actually triggered. And so we're going to open up the one that is for view transitions. In here, you'll notice that there is a view transition animation API that React has added. and a default fade out transition has been applied to it. The way this works is that React will add the pseudo selectors of group, old, and new with the animation name or the class name that we've provided. This is actually a standard web API that React has actually implemented automatically behind the scenes. But if we want to add a custom animation, we can easily do that by using these pseudo selectors. So let's try that. We're going to give a custom class name called scaleIn, and to define what animation should go, I'm going to add it to my app CSS. And I'm going to add a scale of 0 to 1 both in X and Y direction. And all I gotta do is add the old and the new and define how I want it to behave when it moves in and moves out. Or basically when it enters and exits. And now I just need to refresh this. And now if I hit watch movie, I have this beautiful scale up effect. And that's how you can animate elements in React 19. So you saw we were able to do that without having to use any CSS library, no frame of motions. But one thing to remember is that ViewTransition considers its children as sort of one block, and the transitions and the animations between components may not be as granular as with animating libraries or animating these objects by itself. So to recap, ViewTransition helps you animate components without having to add any animation library. It is part of React Experimental. You can trigger a view transition by using a start transition, and view transition considers elements as sort of a group. So it animates them group by group as like a big image instead of element by element. I think combining it with activity is where the magic happens. You can keep the state, and then when the user moves in and out, you can show them really cool animations of fading in, fading out, scaling up, and it can make for a really good UX. Now, here's the thing. You can watch a tutorial all day long, but if you don't actually practice what you're learning, it's no use. You're not going to remember it as well, which is why I love today's sponsor, Scrimba. What's cool about Scrimba is that you can actually watch the tutorial while you're doing the course, then try out code as you learn it. So you can actually get instant feedback and start coding while you're learning. This is the best way of learning. A lot of folks have asked me what is the best resource if I want to become a full stack developer, and I found the perfect course for you. Why this is cool is because it teaches you the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, which is something that I recommend for everybody to get started with first. But it also teaches you AI engineering as well, which is something that you need today. It teaches you the fundamentals, RAG and vector databases, and how to create an AI agent, which is something that you need today. This is the complete course that you need to know in order to become a full stack developer. And you can get it by following the link in the description, which gives you 20% off any pro plan. Thanks so much to Scrimba for sponsoring this video. And now back to React 19.2. Now let's talk about a new React hook that's been introduced in 19.2. In fact, the only new React hook introduced. useEffectEvent. This is a React hook which I am personally very excited about, because I feel like a lot of the React code that we've written in useEffect sometimes has a lot of dependencies that it doesn't actually need. And so you may have ended up with code like this, where you would have this array of dependencies, and this is a growing list because you keep adding more and more stuff here. And this is especially found in effects where you have to log something and you need a lot of data that you need to send. Here's a common example of where this can be a problem. You would see a use effect like here. This can be an ever-growing list, especially if you have a ton of data that you want to log for that page, for that impression. Now, I covered problems like this with useEffect in my video on mistakes with useEffect, so go check that out. It'll be in the link in the description as well. But the problem with this code is, if you notice, we're actually logging analytics, but what happens when you have something in the dependency array? Anytime one of these data changes, you would run the effect again. In this case, imagine that we actually don't want to rerun the effect when step changes or router path name changes or metadata changes. Imagine that we only want to log this request on journey. In that case, if you removed any of these dependencies, React hook would throw an error telling you to add all exhaustive dependencies, which is why you would have seen a disable line like this in your code. This is exactly what useEffectEvent prevents. So because we don't want to log anything other than journey, which means that journey is the only reactive value here, we can create an effect event with the hook useEffectEvent, where we can log anything that is non-reactive. Remember this, it's not just a hack to fix the exhaustive dependencies warning. It's actually a way to tell React that these values are non-reactive, as in do not rerun the effect when these values change. So now instead of calling the same thing, you can call log analytics with journey. And now this effect will only rerun when journey changes, but not rerun when step or enhanced metadata, any of these fields change. And that is use effect event. In summary, use effect event is a hook that can be used to move non-reactive values out into this hook so that you can prevent use effect from running unnecessarily on non-reactive value. I'm excited about this hook because I have noticed that in my use effects, I've had to disable this exhaustive dependencies ESLint warning because of the same reason. I did not want to add in the dependency array. So I'm excited to use this hook and clean up my use effects. And now for the fourth update that I am super stoked about, performance tracks. Performance tracks are actually really cool for debugging, especially if you want to see why one component takes longer than another one or why one component is actually slowing down the app. Let me show you how this works. So performance tracks is actually part of React 19.2. There's nothing you need to do to actually get it. The way to see it is by inspecting console, going to network, going to performance, and you will actually see performance tracks right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start profiling, and I'm going to click on watch movie, and then I'm going to play this movie, and then I'm going to stop. And now let me show you performance tracks. The performance tracks are actually this custom scheduler and components in the React Dev Tools. Now, why this is cool, let me show you. This shows you exactly how much time and which component spend time in blocking, gesture, transition, and suspense. Why this is important is because let's look at this track here. So this is when we click the watch movie button. It shows you that there was an event click happen, an update got blocked, and we can actually look at why this got blocked. There is probably some task happening here because of which it got blocked. Then render took 1.4 milliseconds, and then finally commit happened. So it is a much more granular showcase of why it took so long, right? And then finally our like image component, the movie component was animating, which took 260 milliseconds. So we can take how long our animations took as well. However, at the bottom here, there is this components track, which is even cool because when it says that it was rendering, we actually have an idea of which component was rendering, which is the movie detail component. Specifically, the movie player component got mounted. So now we know that movie player is the component that is mounting at this point. This is a much clearer way of knowing which components are blocking, which components are taking how long, and at what point are each of those components running. So remember we already had React DevTools, which comes with components and profiler. This is actually in addition to React DevTools. This was actually a question that I asked the React core meta team at React Conf, so you can go check that out here if you want to see their answer. But in short, the performance tracks are separate from React DevTools. I've noticed that React DevTools are still really helpful for understanding how many times a component re-rendered, especially knowing which components got memoized by React compiler. Speaking of which, React Compiler is now stable. I'm so excited for this one. React Compiler, if you don't know, is a tool that lets you compile your React code and also auto-memoize your React code so that you don't have to write use memos and use callbacks anymore. It was in beta for a long time, but now it is stable. So you can go ahead and install that. It still comes as part of a Babel plugin, so you can go ahead and install that. And React Compiler works for React 17, 18, and 19. So you don't need to use memos and use callbacks anymore. And this was a question that I asked the React core meta team as well, which was, can we remove our use memos now? And the answer is yes. So yes, so excited for that. Go ahead and remove your use memos. Now, there are other updates that I want to cover that I didn't get to go in detail. Cache signal is now available with React 19.2. This is useful when you have React Server components. If you're using React Server components, cache signal basically is sort of like an abort signal that lets you know when cache lifetime is over. If you're not using React Server components, you won't need this. I imagine that this would be useful for frameworks. An example of how to use this is you have a fetch request, you call that, and then you can give it a signal, cache signal, which can actually be aborted if you want to cancel requests. Another cool thing is that in React 19.2, partial pre-rendering is being added, which is really cool. Again, this is one of those features which I think that frameworks are going to implement, but you can return a prelude shell to the client and later call resume to an SSR stream, which is going to be helpful for streaming. One notable change is how suspense behaves now in 19.2. In earlier versions of React, suspense would show your fallbacks one by one. However, now in 19.2, the suspense boundaries are now batched together, allowing more content together. And finally, there's a new version of ESLint plugin React Hooks, which also has recommendations for React Compiler. All right, that was React 19.2. We covered a lot. We covered activity and view transitions for smoother animations and saving the state of your app. Use effect event for cleaner effects, especially for non-reactive dependencies. Performance track for easily debugging your apps and knowing how much time a component spend in which phase. Batching suspense boundaries for better SSR, partial pre-rendering, React compiler being stable, new version of ESLint React Hook. Which feature are you excited to try out? Tell me in the comments below. And if this video helped you understand React 19.2, give me a big thumbs up. My goal is to get to 200 likes in this video, and then I'll make a deep dive on async React. Don't forget to check out Scrimba if you want to uplevel your React skills. And here is the next video you can watch to learn how to avoid 16 React use effect mistakes. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.